Hi, I decided to record this clip to offer a few thoughts on why we got to where we are right now, which seems to be a pretty brittle society that's seeking to explain what's happened to bring us to this point. It seems to be a point of low trust and fragility rather than confidence and strength. And there are some narratives kicking around that are largely untrue and really unhelpful. So I wanted to take a bit of time just to offer a different perspective, one that begins for the purposes of this piece at around the end of World War II. But it would be better to track back to World War One, the events leading up to it and the economic damage caused by it, but there's only so much time. So let's see what we've got, shall we? A few simple questions here. The British Constitution, if you can show me where it's written down, that'll be great. And if we can have a look at the updates, that too would be great. Because it's not actually written down anywhere. And perhaps one of the strengths of the British Constitution is that it is an evolving entity. So it's very hard to be objective about what's been eroded when you're unable to reference, so this stuff on page 7 doesn't apply anymore. It quite simply doesn't work like that. I want to move on now to the idea of international law. It's more than just what's written down, it's about how we do business with each other. And we seem to have moved from generally accepted global rules about how things happen to a far more transactional, the winners win, and if you haven't won, well, tough. And we're seeing that increasingly with huge economic bargaining power forcing down the currencies, the stability and the economic and social fabric and well-being of other countries that aren't perhaps as wealthy or as winning. One of the things that we're going to get with elected representatives is you're not always going to get what you want. And sometimes when you do, it turns out, that wasn't quite what I thought I was voting for. All right, but that's the way it goes. That's politics. And politics, I think, is very much a moving feast where ideas emerge through discussion. And the more we're actually able to challenge those ideas through the ballot box and, yes, through our committees, through local party meetings, the better it is, the more involvement we get from as many people who want to produce their ideas, who want to put their time and efforts and engagement, the more communities that are represented within that process, the better it is. What I don't think we can do is to abandon the whole process to popularism and individualism. I checked up on a few things yesterday and found that the most recent arrival of migrants, formal and informal, to the UK, they came from Afghanistan, Syria and Somalia, and all three of those countries are in varying degrees destroyed by conflict, civil war and significant oppression. And there's something about the UK that we share perhaps with France and one or two other countries. There's a colonial past and there is an impact, there is a historical trace there that has led to a channeling of migration. We also need to think about the impacts of global change and how that's affected the way people are able to live their lives. Globalisation too, the movement of plant and labour to where it can be done cheapest, has had profound effects on how people can organise and live their lives. Culture, I often wonder about what that means, and I was talking to somebody years ago and we agreed that it probably means something like, well, it's what happens around here. So yeah, culture will change. And I'm going to take a look now at a piece that might be of some interest, that the UK's economy, it was weakened well before mass migration. And this feeds back into that opening piece about, you could take a look towards the end of the First World War and what tracked on from there, but we're going to take a look at the Second World War just to keep it manageable. So this part of it is pretty well referenced, really, so please, by all means, take a look. At the end of World War II, it's fair to say that the British economy was on the ropes and flagging, and then we get these two major actions from the States, that the Lend-Lease, okay, will lend you on lease what you need and you pay an interest for it. That's converted into a loan with some pretty harsh clauses around it. And then the Bretton Woods system, where the dollar is now the global reserve currency. Not only does that actually diminish sterling's role, but it increases the perception that things are not well or going to be well in the UK. When we take a look at trade and investment, what do we see? US companies are stripping ahead of their British counterparts. The good ones are being acquired by US companies. With that goes control and talent and production. And we're also seeing American trade policies discriminating against British goods whilst promoting US exports, as if that could ever happen again. And then we have interest rates. When the US put up its interest rates, money flew out of Britain, invested in the US, forcing the UK to put up its interest rates. And those of us who lived through and survived the 80s will know only too well just what an impact that had. It wasn't just the USA. There were massive problems, and I'm going to talk from around about the end of the 60s onwards. There was this guy in our estate, and he bought a new motorbike. It was a Honda 250, and it was beautiful in comparison to anything you could buy, same kind of money, that was made in the UK. The chrome was fantastic, paintwork was a delight, and it got all sorts of bits and bobs on it. What it actually was a representation of just how far ahead Japan had got in quite a short time. And then we take a look at what happened with the wider automobile industry, and it effectively did a job on wiping out British cars. When we take a look at why did that happen, well, the means of production, the upgrading of plant machinery and working practices was just way behind the game. When we take a look at the Americans, it's pretty easy on the basis of what I've said here to demonise them. But their security guarantees through NATO meant that, in common with other European countries, the UK didn't have to spend as much on defence. All right, that's changed now. But it would be wrong to produce a piece like this and to point over the Atlantic Ocean and say, it's your fault. There's far more to it than that. So it is complex, and maybe the UK's inability to adapt to competitive realities, and I mean adapt ethically. I'm not into say adapt to 0 hours contract and work as much as you can for a rate that doesn't provide you with your basic living needs. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how the UK embraced the competitive realities, dealt with the threats they presented, but was also able to capitalise on the opportunities that they provided. So that's just a little overview, particularly from a personal point of view. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if it stimulates some conversation, it'd be great to see it on here. Thanks for taking a look at it.